Hey movie buffs, and welcome to another episode of Double Feature with your host Pedro. The topic for today's episode is comedy. More specifically, comedies crafted by directors known for their prowess in drama. Comedy and making people laugh is a hard task that requires a lot of trial and error. If you need any more proof, just look at all the previous episodes of this segment and you'll know what I mean. Very few actors have been able to transition from drama to comedy. Actors are used to emphasize subtlety and naturalism in their performances, and transitioning into comedy often requires them embracing a more expressive and at times exaggerated style of acting. I can only think of a few examples of actors who are both successful in comedy and drama, the likes of Jack Lemmon, Jim Carrey, Steve Carell, Tom Hanks, and of course, the GOAT, Steve Guttenberg. If this transition is already difficult in acting, imagine how difficult it must be for a director to really capture the essence of a comedic screenplay and converting it into images. As a result, even fewer directors have successfully navigated the realms of both comedy and drama. On the top of my mind, I'm thinking of Billy Wilder, Frank Capra, Sidney Pollack, and even Ron Howard. And nothing exemplifies the challenges of creating a successful comedy like today's picks. Two satires and critical misfires made by directors trying to branch out into different genres. Two titles that are visually striking and incorporate elaborate set pieces. Two movies whose uniqueness, quirkiness, and tonal combination have resulted in minor cult followings over the years. So let's get to it.
December 1941, the California coast. The Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. A nation's heroes were on the alert.
Look, you guys, a Jap sub!
The dummy's right.
California could be next.
How do you follow two mega box office hits of the caliber of Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Well, if you're Steven Spielberg, you do it with a comedy, even if the subject matter is a tad tongue-in-cheek, like the ones depicted in 1979's release of 1941. 1941 follows a series of chaotic events in Los Angeles triggered by false alarms and paranoia surrounding the possibility of an enemy invasion immediately after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. As the citizens of Los Angeles grapple with the uncertainties of war, the situation intensifies when a routine coastal defense exercise goes awry. There are multiple subplots in this zany comedy, like the one featuring Captain Wild Bill Kelso's Coast Patrol mission that always ends up in a confusing mess, Sergeant Tree and his crew's installation of an anti-aircraft battery in a family's yard, Major General Joseph W. Stilwell's attempts to calm the public, the kidnapping of lumberjack Hollis Hollywood by the Imperial Navy, and others. When writers Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis first pitched the project, it was presented as a drama inspired by the real-life Japanese bombardment of Elwood, California in 1942, and the panic that followed resulting from fears of a Japanese invasion. The movie's tone radically changed once Spielberg got attached to the project. Spielberg envisioned the whole movie as a 1940s inspired screwball comedy, essentially replicating a recurring trend at the time that resulted in titles such as The Sting, The Fortune, and What's Up, Doc? But Spielberg was hardly the right person to helm a project of this nature, at least at that point in his career. The director didn't necessarily have an understanding of comedy and what audiences deemed funny. Also, the scope of the action, extensive special effects, and the high number of key characters and elaborate set pieces would demand the highest budget the director had worked with so far. And considering the delays and cost escalations of his two previous projects, it is safe to assume that a perfectionist like Spielberg would drive the costs even further with this project. But overall, there was hope for 1941, mainly because of the movie's cast. Boasting names such as Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, two extremely popular actors from Saturday Night Live, Warren Oates, Treat Williams, John Candy, Christopher Lee, and even Toshiro Mifune in a rare appearance in a non-Japanese movie, led Universal to believe this movie would be a hit. And they were partially right. Whilst destroyed by the critics and largely considered to be a bomb, the movie was actually a moderate box office success, earning 92 million worldwide on a budget of 35 million. Of course, this outcome was eons away from the box office results of Spielberg's previous movies. The movie would also reunite Spielberg with two actors from Jaws. Murray Hamilton, who played the mayor in Jaws, plays Claude, a citizen tasked with scouting for enemy aircrafts. And Lorraine Gary plays Joan Douglas. Lorraine Gary would retire from acting after this movie, returning only for the fourth Jaws film in 1987. A terrific actress whose film credits were certainly a product of her skill and not the fact that she was married to Sid Sheinberg, who headed Universal's parent company, MCA, between 1973 and 1995. It's all about who you know. And whilst 1941 isn't a particularly laugh-out-loud comedy like contemporary titles such as The Jerk and Blazing Saddles, it certainly has its moments and plenty of charm. So why did it fail to connect with audiences and critics? Well, the first reason I can think of is expectations. After Jaws and Close Encounters, moviegoers were expecting more entries in line with the style and tone of Spielberg's two previous efforts. As a result, they may not have been fully prepared to embrace the film's blend of wartime satire, slapstick comedy, and absurdity. Also, Aykroyd and Belushi had yet to star in The Blues Brothers, the duo's breakout title. Belushi was at the time closely associated with Animal House and a gross-out type of humor intended to shock the viewer, hardly the selling point you would associate with a Steven Spielberg film. There is also the complexity of the plot. The movie features no less than 7 subplots and sometimes switches way too much between them. And whilst they're not particularly complex, it can be tough to keep up with all of them, especially during a first watch. Finally, and this is more of a personal theory, studios and critics somewhat wanted Spielberg to fail. The young director had become an overnight success, and despite his movies going over budget and over schedule, you couldn't argue with the final results. But there was some anxiety on studio executives' part, and they may have felt he needed to be taught a lesson. Also, the director's ego was soaring. Steven Spielberg's hubris led him to use 1941's opening sequence to pay tribute to himself. Susan Beckley reprises her role from Jaws that's virtually identical to the opening of the 1975 blockbuster. Hardly a humble move from a man who only had 3 major features under his belt at the time. So the critics may have been a bit too harsh with the Wunderkind's latest picture, as they found the director going crazy with his newfound success. But critics and results aside, this is actually a pretty good comedy that deserves your time. 1941's ensemble cast, the way the movie explores historical events with a comedic twist, and the satirical commentary on American culture and society during a time of crisis are just some of the reasons I recommend Spielberg's first comedy. Audiences back in 1996 weren't quite ready for the movie event of the year. A sci-fi romp depicting a full-scale alien invasion, featuring an all-star cast with some of Hollywood's biggest names, and boasting incredible scenes covering the destruction of landmarks across the globe. But in December 1996, that's exactly what they got when Tim Burton's Mars Attacks premiered. In Burton's movie, Earth faces an outer-worldly invasion when Martians descend upon the planet with apparent intentions of peaceful coexistence. As global leaders, including President James Dale, played by Jack Nicholson, attempt to welcome the extraterrestrial visitors, the situation takes a chaotic turn. The seemingly friendly Martians reveal a sinister agenda, unleashing destructive ray guns and reducing iconic landmarks and people to rubble. It's up to a ragtag group of survivors to work together and save the world. The movie underwent a major rewrite, which resulted in the reduction of the number of core characters from 60 to 20, and the action, events, and scale toned down. Burton envisioned the movie as both a nod to the 1950s sci-fi B-movies and the 1970s disaster pictures featuring an ensemble cast. An angle that was retained throughout the whole pre-production process and visible in the final product. I don't know who or what Burton had to sell his soul to, but he managed to gather the most impressive cast ever assembled in a movie. Jack Nicholson, Glenn Close, Annette Bening, Michael J. Fox, Pierce Brosnan, Danny DeVito, Natalie Portman, Rod Steiger, Jack Black, Pam Grier, and even Tom Jones. And what's even more impressive is the list of names that were approached to actually star in this movie. Names such as Meryl Streep, Johnny Depp, Michael Keaton, Paul Newman, and Warren Beatty are just some of the names that were at one point attached to the project. Based on the top trading cards of the early 1960s, Mars Attacks had a long gestation period after it was initially pitched in 1985. When Tim Burton finally became associated with the project in the mid-1990s, he faced some skepticism on Warner Brothers' part. No wonder the original budget for this project was roughly $250 million. Yet despite its impressive ensemble, commercially oriented director, and the unplanned boost from Independence Day, Mars Attacks failed to turn a profit, and wasn't particularly well received by audiences and critics. And though I can sort of understand why, it's appalling to see how many failed to appreciate this kick-ass movie. Some of the criticisms pointed towards the movie include the lack of a cohesive and well-defined plot, with numerous characters and subplots contributing to a sense of chaos. The characters are also accused of being too exaggerated and over the top. Well, duh, this movie is supposed to be a satire of two different genres that heavily use these tropes. Characters are supposed to be over the top, and the movie's plot is actually quite simple. Sure, there are a couple of detours, but they all exist for comedic purposes. And speaking of the plot being all over the place, I believe that the movie features the best non sequitur of all time.
It's not unusual to be loved by anyone. It's not unusual to have fun with anyone. Or when I see you hanging about with anyone, it's not unusual to see me cry. I wanna die.
So even during a global alien invasion, Tom Jones can sell out shows in Vegas, with fans turning up in droves to see him. I'd like to see Taylor Swift pulling that off. Some reviewers even criticized the film for its intentionally campy visuals, arguing that the special effects and overall aesthetics undermine the seriousness of an alien invasion premise. Again, this was always the intention. Burton wanted the movie to look cheap and as fake-looking as possible. This is part of his whimsical execution and style, and you see it throughout his whole filmography, especially during 1988's Beetlejuice. Also, it's difficult to believe that the director's prior project, Ed Wood, didn't heavily influence the filmmaker and further fueled his wish to incorporate Wood's cheap aesthetics and visuals from his low-budgeted productions of the 1950s. And if there's one aspect in which this movie excels, is the way Tim Burton was able to get everyone fully on board with the movie's tongue-in-cheek tone. I mean, just look at good old Jack Nicholson having the time of his life, hamming it up.
Think how strong we would be. Earth and Mars together.
The movie also includes some deadpan comedy moments that wouldn't fly with today's audiences.
Do the Martians have two sexes, like we do?
I guess it's just one more reason to watch this classic. So yeah, this is a fun, light-hearted entry that's a million miles better than the dark and broody stuff Tim Burton has been putting out since 2003. If you are on board with brain-dead satires, where stuff happens just because, if the idea of seeing Hollywood A-listers not taking themselves too seriously piques your interest, and if you share the same cynical views as Sylvia Sidney's character,
They blew up Congress!
then Mars Attacks is the right movie for you. Once again, I'm Peter from Vinyl and Celluloid, thanks for watching, And if you are interested in finding out my thoughts on other movies, go over to my Letterboxd page where you can read over 300 reviews penned by yours truly. Until next time, keep the reels rolling.
Shutterstock.